Okay.
Where are we holding? Muscular Rafuna. On the bottom of Kuf Dalet, 114. 114b. The Gemara before said that if sacrifices were brought too early outside the temple, so he doesn't incur the punishment of sacrificing outside the temple because it was too early. It had its own invalidation. So Rab Chilkiah Bar Tuvi had an interesting opinion. He says that if a sacrifice was brought too early, so it would be invalid. And hence, if it was brought outside the temple, there would be no punishment of bringing it outside the temple. But that's only if it was brought for its own purpose, for its own, as the sacrifice. However, if it was brought for a different reason, for a different sacrifice, that sacrifice had no problem of being brought too early, then he would incur the punishment outside the temple. So let's be more specific. You have an asham. An asham needs to be brought after a certain amount of time, when the person is in his atonement process, his purification process of being a Mitzvah. And instead of bringing it at the right time, he brings it too early. But instead of bringing it too early as an asham, he brings it too early as an oila. So Reb Chilkiah Bar Tuvi says it's going to be chayav, because it was shaloi l'shmai. It was shaloi l'shmai. This oila would have been acceptable, because an oila doesn't need a specific time. An oila can always be brought, so it's not considered too early. You follow? The sacrifice was brought too early. But the only problem of being too early is if it's brought correctly as an asham. But he's bringing it too early, and he's also changing it from an asham to an oila. An oila is a donation. You can bring an oila whenever you want. So in his changing it from its correct sacrifice, he's actually correcting the time by making it acceptable too early, because he's turning it into an oila. So now that he's turning it into an oila, so it should be acceptable. Now, what we're talking about is that he's slaughtering it outside the temple. So, if it's acceptable, then he incurs the punishment of bringing it outside the temple. So if he would bring it as an asham, then he would have no punishment, because it's too early. It's invalid. But because he's messing it up and saying that it's not an asham, he's saying that it's an oila. We're on 114b. At the bottom. So because he's doing that, he's now making it acceptable to be brought too early. So because he's changing the type of sacrifice, so it's making it acceptable, and hence he's going to incur the punishment of bringing it outside the temple as a valid sacrifice. That was Reb Chilkiah. That's what we learned yesterday. Today we learn Maskefla Rav Huna. Rav Huna asks the question: if you would bring it for its correctly, for its own sacrifice, as an asham, it would be invalid, and therefore you would incur no punishment outside the temple. However, it's going to be kosher if you bring it incorrectly. To bring it correctly as an asham, it's too early. To bring it incorrectly as an oila, it's going to be kosher. How does it get kosher when you do it wrong? If you did it right, it would be invalid. You do it wrong, it becomes kosher.
But it's either way chayiv.
Well, no, he's doing it outside the temple. So if it's invalid, so then he's pater for shchitas chutz, because it wasn't a kosher sacrifice.
Yeah,
So it's an asham, it's not kosher. So the rule is that an asham shaloi l'shmai is kosher. If you bring it for the wrong reason, an asham that you bring instead of, it's supposed to be an asham, but you slaughter it with intention that it's an oila. So it's kosher. It's a machlokes. We're going to have later, it's a machlokes. But we hold, the sages hold that it's kosher. So, but it's incorrect. But we're saying that, this incorrectness is going to correct the problem of the wrong time, because an oila has no designated time when it should be brought, it's just a donation. Rav Huna is just shocked that if you would do it correctly, it would be invalid. Now you're doing it incorrect, it becomes valid. Is there such a thing? So the Gemara asks in him, V'loi, you don't find such a thing? Well, I can show you such a thing. V'harei Pesach, we're on top of page 115, Shani Ma'aseh Shana. A korban Pesach, you can only bring on Erev Pesach after Chatzos. If you bring it too early on Erev Pesach, it's invalid. If you bring a korban Pesach the rest of the year, so if you bring it as a Pesach, then it's a problem. But if you bring a Pesach, you can't bring it as a Pesach. However, it is kosher, but kosher shalei l'shmai. But if you bring it as a shlamim, it's kosher. So you bring it as a Pesach, it's invalid. If you bring it correctly, it's invalid. If you bring it incorrectly, you bring it as a shlamim, as a peace offering, then it's valid. So here's a good example. That if you do it correctly, it's invalid. If you do it incorrectly, it's valid. So here too, we have an asham that's too early. If you bring it right now, it's invalid. But if you bring it as an oila, which it's not, it would be valid. That's the proof for Reb Chilkiah. Reb Huna responds that that's not so. Pesach b'shayim ma'aseh shana shlamim minenu. It's not that you're bringing it incorrectly, and that's why it's going to be valid. A Pesach is a shlamim. That's what it is, and therefore when you bring a Pesach the rest of the year, it's a shlamim. It's not that you're bringing it for the wrong sacrifice. That's what it is. It is a shlamim. And so therefore, only when something is brought correctly will it be valid, and then if it's brought incorrectly, it may still be valid. But you can't have something that is brought incorrectly valid, and if it's brought correctly, it's invalid. It doesn't make sense. You do it wrong, and it works. You do it correctly, it doesn't work. That's Rav Huna's logic. Now again, Reb Chilkiah's logic was, no, if I bring a asham right now, it's too early. But if I change what sacrifice it's going to be, which is incorrect, you're not supposed to do that. For an oila, I change an asham for an oila, and I bring it now, I slaughter it with intention that it should be an oila, which is incorrect, it's going to be valid. Because an oila is never too early. An oila could be too early if the animal is too young. But the owner doesn't have to wait. He can always bring a donation sacrifice whenever he wants. And now we're going to outside the temple. If it's valid, then he incurs the punishment of bringing a sacrifice outside the temple, a valid sacrifice. If it would be invalid, like an asham, too early, then he won't have it. Lema Messiah lei. Let's say that we can bring a proof to Reb Chilkiah that says that if you do it shaloi l'shmai, it's going to be valid. Yochel shani maiti. Maybe I could exclude. I was learning this Gemara this morning, and Rashi says Yochel shani maiti. You see Rashi? It says El Pesach. It didn't have a saf. You see Rashi? Yochel shani maiti El Pesach. It had a samach. The word Pesach. Thinking that we're talking about a Pesach sacrifice, the printer put a samach, which is the way you spell Pesach, but it was a mistake. It was supposed to say Pesach, a doorway, which is with a taf, a saf, not a samach. So it was just so confusing. I read it a few times. I knew there was a mistake. I just didn't know what it was. What's going on here is there's a verse that says, to the entrance to the tent of meeting, it has not been brought, which is the verse that says that you're not allowed to bring a sacrifice outside the temple. Okay? So maybe, the verse that says that you can't bring a sacrifice outside the temple, maybe I should exclude from that prohibition. Oila, it's supposed to be oila. Oila mechusus man b'bailim. An oila that's being brought too early. For example, a woman that gives birth. She's supposed to bring an oila, but she has to wait a certain amount of days. She didn't wait. Now, an oila could be brought at other times as well. An oila is a donation. But this woman has a certain time when she is supposed to bring it, and she's bringing it too early. So maybe because she's bringing it too early, I'll say that she doesn't incur the punishment of bringing a sacrifice outside the temple because it's too early. It has its own problem. It's invalid. And maybe also Asham Nazir Asham Mitzayra, a guilt offering that a Nazir brings, and a guilt offering that a Mitzayra, a leper, brings. Maybe it will be punishment free if it's brought outside the temple with some sort of invalidation. The Gemara didn't say what's wrong with it. It didn't say. It only said that the oila was too early. But these were, maybe there'll be no punishment here. Talmud Laimar, the pasuk teaches us, Shar mikol makam, Kesef mikol makam, Eis mikol makam. No matter what, there's a punishment. Which means that an oila too early is still valid. Right? An oila too early is still valid. And whatever is going on with this Asham and Mitzayra is also still valid. And that's why there is a punishment if it's brought outside the temple. The only thing is it didn't tell us what was wrong with it. Okay. Now, one thing that it didn't say is v'ilu chatas shayrei. It didn't say that a chatas would have been valid outside the temple. We're not referring to a sacrifice outside the temple being valid. We're referring to a sacrifice outside the temple having some other defect, something that's wrong with it, and it's being brought outside the temple. It's valid enough that he gets punished for bringing it outside the temple. Whereas if the sacrifice would be invalid, then outside the temple would not be a punishment. It's no sacrifice. It's invalid for other reasons, not because it's outside the temple. So it didn't say that the chatas, he would incur the punishment by a chatas. He only said that it would incur the punishment by an oila that's too early and by an asham for a nazir and asham mitzayra. Why did it leave out a chatas? But mayaskinan, what are we dealing with? What's the case here? Ilema bizmanai, are we talking about that it's in the correct time? And he's bringing it for the right sacrifice. So my area asham. Why are you saying that an asham he incurs the punishment? I feel a chatas nami. Even a chatas he should incur the punishment. He brought it outside the temple. Why do we need the pasuk to teach me only asham? It must be elash leilas mani. We're talking about that it's in the wrong time. The asham is being brought too early, and nevertheless he still incurs the punishment. And now we're going to try to say that by a chatas it would be different. But we have to figure out why. We're on 115. Kuf Tesvav. Ubemai. What are we dealing with? Ilema. If we say lishmai, that he's bringing it as a guilt offering, as an asham. Asham amai chayev. Why is he chayev? He's bringing it too early. An asham too early, it's not valid. Oh, did I skip a line? No, we said that we're talking about that it's not in the correct time. Ilim bizmanai my area asham afil chatas nami. El shleilas man, we're talking about that it's in the wrong time. Ubemai ilim lishmai, if it's for the sake of an asham my chayev. El alav shleilashmai. It must be that he's bringing it and he's bringing the asham. It's in the wrong time because it's too early. But what's he doing? He's changing the sacrifice that it's meant to be brought for. Instead of bringing it as an asham, he's bringing it as an ayla. we have a proof that if you would bring it correctly, too early, but correctly for an asham, it would not be valid. But because he's bringing it incorrectly, he's bringing it shalai lishma, he's bringing it for an ayla, so it becomes valid. It's a proof to Rav Chilkiah. Rav Chilkiah said that it's possible that if you bring it correctly, it would not be valid, but if you bring it incorrectly, it becomes valid. And now the person's bringing it outside the temple, and because it's valid, because he's bringing it incorrectly for the wrong sacrifice, too early, but for the wrong sacrifice, it's okay to be too early. So then he'll incur the punishment. That's a proof to Reb Chilkiah. Gemara says it's not a proof. In other words, what's our proof? Our proof here is that when you bring there's a difference between an asham and a chatas shalei l'shmai. An asham shalei l'shmai is kosher if you bring an asham for the sake of an ayla. It's supposed to be an asham, was designated as asham, and he slaughters it with intention, this is an ayla. It's kosher. If you bring a chata shalei l'shmai, you bring a chata sin offering, he shechts it for the sake of an ayla, it's not kosher. So now we have a brisa here that says that if the asham was brought outside the temple, I could have thought that it's invalid for some other purpose. It didn't explain what. The Torah tells me that it's valid, and he incurs the punishment of bringing a sacrifice outside the temple. So, what was the problem there that you're discussing? So we said it must be a problem that by a chatas it would be invalid, and by the asham it's valid, because we didn't mention that a chatas incurs the punishment. We only said the asham incurs the punishment. So we found something that by a chatas would be invalid anyway, and that's why the pasuk doesn't include it to incur the punishment. But by the asham, it would be valid. What is that? If it's brought for the wrong intention. Now we were saying that it was brought too early and for the wrong intention, and because it's for the wrong intention, it's able to be valid. Because too early by an asham is a problem, but too early by an ayla is allowed. And that doesn't work by a chatas, because a chatas for the wrong intention is invalid. So we have a perfect way of explaining this brisa, that he'll incur the punishment of sacrificing an asham outside the Beis Hamikdash when it's too early, because he had in mind that it was for an ayla. Right? The Gemara says, really, li'olam bismanai. Really, it's not being brought too early. It's being brought in its correct time. Bishalei l'shmai. It's just being brought for the wrong reason. It's brought for the wrong reason. It's brought as an ayla, so it's kosher. So why do I need a pasuk to tell me that it's valid and that he incurs the punishment outside the temple? Every kosher sacrifice outside the temple incurs the punishment of bringing a sacrifice outside the temple. So an asham for the wrong reason is kosher. So I don't need a special pasuk to teach me that he did a violation of bringing a sacrifice outside the temple. Gemara says, no, Rabbi Eliezer, this is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. He changes it to Rabbi Lazar. It's the opinion of Rabbi Lazar. Damar makshina nasham lechatas. There's one opinion that holds that if you bring chatas for the wrong intention, it's invalid. So too, an asham for the wrong intention, it's invalid. Now, even though it's invalid, but if you bring it outside the temple, you still incur the punishment of bringing a sacrifice outside the temple. In other words, yes, it doesn't work, the sacrifice doesn't work for the owner, the sacrifice is invalid, it gets burnt and whatever, but nevertheless, it's still considered a sacrifice outside the temple, and that's what I learned from the pasuk. Now the question is, if it has the same rule as a chatas, both of them are invalid, and nevertheless, outside the temple it's a prohibition, and he incurs the punishment to bring a sacrifice outside the temple, so why didn't it say a chatas? That was our problem. It only says that this applies to an asham. It doesn't mention the chatas. Right? So, Betana Tafel V'Uadinikir. The Tana teaches me about an asham, but I'd understand, if this is the rule by a asham, that outside the temple it's considered valid enough that he incurs the punishment, the same thing should apply to a chatas, which is also exactly in the same category. if it's slaughtered for the wrong purpose, an asham that's slaughtered for asham or a chatas that's slaughtered for the sake of an oila, they're both the same, but outside the temple, there he would incur the punishment of bringing a sacrifice outside the temple. Okay, that was an attempted proof to Reb Chilkiah and a refutation to the proof. Tashema, try again. Yochel shani marbe. Last time was maybe I should exclude. Now it's maybe I should include, and the pasuk is going to tell me no, don't include it. Yochel shani marbe oila. It's supposed to be oila mechusas man begufa. Let's say an oila was brought too young. Every animal needs to wait at least 8 days before it's brought. You can't bring an animal under 8 days old. Okay, that's a pasuk. Maybe if I bring an oila too young outside the temple, within the first 8 days, maybe that's going to be considered a sacrifice, and I would incur the punishment of bringing a sacrifice outside the temple, even though it's too young. We're going to bring a pasuk that says no. It's too young. It's not a sacrifice. Doesn't count.
How young's too young?
Under 8 days.
8 days.
Korban Pesach is very young because the season that it was brought, that's when the sheep would have their babies, but you needed to wait 8 days. That's why the pasuk gives there's a big deal about breaking the bones, because in the young animals it was easy to break the bone. Okay, and v'chatas bein begufa bein bebailam, and let's say a chatas is brought not in its appropriate time. It's too young. Now, too young, whether the animal is too young, that's what it means begufa, or bebailam means that the owners didn't wait long enough to bring it. It means they were supposed to wait for something to happen. Maybe the woman that gave birth was supposed to wait till the 33 days or 66 days or whatever it was, till she brings her sacrifices. Whatever the case is by the chatas, maybe if it's slaughtered outside the temple, he'll incur the punishment of bringing a sacrifice outside the temple, even though the time is not correct. To the tent of meeting, he did not bring it. That's the prohibition. Anything that is not meant to be brought to the tent of meeting anyway, then he's not chayiv. If it's anyways not meant to be brought, then he's not chayiv for bringing it outside the temple. When is he chayiv to bring it outside the temple? If he was supposed to bring it to the tent of meeting. But if he wasn't supposed to bring it, why? Because it was too young or too early, he's not chayiv. That's what it says about the oila that's too young, and a chatas that's too young or too early. Too young because the animal's too young, or too early because the owner wasn't the time for the owner to bring it there. V'ilu asham shaire, but it doesn't talk about an asham. Why not? Why doesn't it say that the asham is going to be chayiv also? The asham is going to be pater if he brings it outside the temple too young or too early. So we say b'mayaskin. What's that case? If he's bringing it for the right sake, for the sake of the chatas or the asham or the oila that he's bringing it for, asham nami lifterei. An asham should also be pater if it's too young or too early. Elalav, it must be shaloi lishmai. It must be that he's bringing it for the wrong sake. A chatas, he's bringing it for an oila, and it's not valid. But an asham, he's bringing it for an oila, it is valid, because an asham shaloi lishmai is valid. And we're seeing that an oila too early, we said, is not a problem. An oila too young is a problem, but an oila too early because the owner, it wasn't the time yet, it's not a problem. It's still considered valid because an oila is a donation. You can bring it any time. And an asham for the wrong sake would be valid. An asham that's meant to be an asham, but you bring it as an oila is valid. A chatas that you bring as an oila is invalid. So why did we leave out asham? Because you bring it for the wrong sake. And it would have been valid. That means it's a proof to Reb Chilkiah that even though if I would bring it correctly as an asham, it would be invalid because it's too early. But if I bring it incorrectly as an oila, it would be valid because an oila too early wasn't the problem. So that was Reb Chilkiah's statement. So this is a proof to Reb Chilkiah. So the Gemara says, "Li'olam shleila shmai." No, you bring it for the wrong sake, and you bring it in the correct time. So why'd we leave out asham? bring it for the wrong sake. That's the problem here. So if it would be an asham, it would be valid. Really, I could just answer like that. Just 1 second. We could answer it just like this. We could just say that he's bringing it for the wrong sake. We left out asham because an asham is valid outside the temple, and we said chatas is invalid, and that's why he doesn't incur the punishment. That would have been a perfect answer. However, the Gemara doesn't answer it because later on it's going to need it slightly different. And what it wants to say is, Rabbi Lezer he demakish asham lachatas. Even though we didn't say asham clearly, but we mean a asham as well. We said that an asham is that the chatas is invalid, and we mean to say an asham also, and we're going according to the opinion of Rabbi Lezer that holds asham and chatas are the same, and we said chatas tani ikar v'kolshkein tafel. The kolshkein it's unclear. Rashi's like, what's the kolshkein? It says the main thing, which is the chatas, is invalid if it's brought for the wrong sake, and hence outside the temple there's no punishment. And the same thing would apply to the asham. The fact that we left it out was because we just said the main thing, but an asham is dragged along with it as well. That's what it says. Okay, Tashema, come and listen. Chiyasa Rav Dibi, when Rav Dibi came from the land of Israel, Amar Tana Debei Bar Levi was taught in the yeshiva of Rab Levi. Yachal Shani Maitzi Af Olam Mechusman B'Bailam. Maybe I should exclude an oila that's brought too early. If it's brought outside, he should be exempt. Maybe I should say that. If it's brought outside the temple, it should be exempt because it's too early. It's not a valid sacrifice. And the same thing would apply to Asham Nazar and Asham Mitzayra with some other problem. It doesn't say which problem. Okay, now, following Gemara is very interesting. It's in parentheses. Some people take it out. Rashi seems to have it. No, actually, I didn't know that Rashi has it. Someone had it here. Let's see the Zion. Yeah, the Shita Mekubetzes has it pub printed. It's an interesting Gemara because it goes like this. The Talmud responds that this is obligated, that this is a guilty. If a person brings these sacrifices outside the temple, he's guilty. Whether it's an oila that's too early, that's not, he didn't. Not that the animal's too young, but he brought it too early because he didn't wait till the time that he's meant to be bringing it, but now he sacrificed it outside the temple. Or an Asham Nazar Sham Mitzayra. And then it goes on, it says, V'lo yadana my Talmudah, but I don't know the teaching. This is Rav Dimi. Rav Dimi came from Israel. He says, that's the rule, I just don't know why. So, Ravina, my time lo yadata, why do you? Ravina tells him, why don't you know? Shor mikol makim. Kesev mikol makim. Eiz mikol makim. Quotes the brisa that we said before. It says that if someone brings these animals outside the temple, he's obligated. And it doesn't matter. He's obligated even though he didn't wait till the right time. So the Gemara asks, this brisa that Rav Dimi is bringing, you already quoted this before. You went through all the questions. You said, what are we dealing with? What was the problem with the Asham? What was the problem with the Asham Nazar and Asham Mitzayra? Was it because it was the wrong time? Was it because Shalei L'Shmai? You asked all the questions and you gave the answers. And now why are you quoting it again from Rav Dimi? What are you gaining now? It says, Hamay Rumya, Kida Amrit. Actually, the Shita Mekubetzes has a different. It says, My Kushya, Dilma Kida Amrit. What's your question? Maybe it's exactly the same as you said before. It says like this. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, Mishum the Kashale, because he had a question. I'm reading from the Shita. The Tani Debei bar Levoi Ad the Tani Levi, because there's a problem between what was said in the house of the yeshiva of Levi and what Levi taught. Levi taught Asham Nazar v'Asham Mitzayra sheshachtan shloil l'shmanos ksherim. If an Asham Mitzayra, an Asham is shechted for the wrong sacrifice, it's kosher. V'loyola l'baylam shem chayva. However, the owners need to bring another sacrifice. This was a Nazir or a Mitzayra. They had to bring their sacrifice. The Kayan, instead of bringing it for the Asham, brings it for an Ayla. The Ayla, the animal is offered and it's eaten and everything. I don't know if it's eaten. An Ayla is burnt. But the blood is sprinkled. Everything is performed. However, they need to go and bring another sacrifice. It's not considered invalid. Shachta mechusar zman b'baylim. Let's say he slaughtered it too early. Or if it was shechted too young, then it's psulim. Then it's invalid. Okay. So now we have a problem, because here we're saying the way we answered this before was we said that it was the opinion of Rebbe Lozer, who holds that if it's slaughtered for the wrong intention, it would be not valid. Okay? Now we're saying that it's not according to that Levi doesn't go like Rebbe Lozer. Levi says if it's slaughtered for the wrong intention, it is valid. So we can't answer the way we answered this before. So Umeshani Rav Dimi answers Loi Kasha. Kan l'shmai v'kan shaloi l'shmai. So here we're saying, Yachol Shani Moitzi, maybe I should exclude it. We say that we're not going to exclude it. Say we're not going to exclude it. That means that he's going to incur the punishment. Why does he incur the punishment? That's when he's bringing it for the wrong intention. That's when he's bringing it as an ayla. If he brings it for the wrong intention, then he gets the punishment of bringing it outside the temple